Hi, I'm Matthew Kelly, and welcome to Living Every Day with Passion and Purpose. Life is choices, and 90% of our happiness, 90% of our misery comes from our own choices. Choices create habits, habits create character, and your character is your destiny. If you can learn to master the moment of decision, you will master life. The art of living is all about that moment where we choose the best version of ourselves or we choose some second-rate, lesser version of ourselves. Living every day with passion and purpose is about learning to make great choices in our everyday lives. Thank you. Thank you. Good evening. When I was a child, I used to play in the sandbox with my brother Andrew. I have 7 brothers, and Andrew is the brother immediately older than me. And for a few years, we played together happily. My mother used to come out in the morning and draw a line down the middle of the sandbox. One half for Andrew, one half for Matthew. And like I say, for a couple of years, we played together happily until one day, Andrew decided that he wanted to be a property developer and that he needed a little bit of extra land for his property development. Now, this was back in the late 70s, and back in the late 70s, Andrew was obviously already a man before his time because he was already practicing business in a way that really only became popular here in America in the 90s. He took his shovel and he hit me over the head with it, I went inside screaming and crying, and he had the extra land he needed. When I got inside, I sat in the middle of the kitchen floor, screaming, crying, thinking, hoping, believing that my mother would come and deliver some justice to this obvious situation of injustice. But no sign of my mother. So I screamed and cried a little bit louder, and still no sign of my mother. So finally, I stopped screaming and crying, and now I could hear my mother whistling to herself upstairs. Say, a ritual she used to practice when she was cleaning the house. And I knew she could hear me screaming and crying, and I knew she was ignoring me, and a great anger began to build up in me. And then all of a sudden, a moment of inspiration. It occurred to me that on Thursday afternoons, my mother used to take my brothers and I grocery shopping, all of us. And if we were good boys while my mother was doing the grocery shopping, if we were good boys, which we always were, at the end of the shopping expedition, my mother used to buy us a small chocolate, maybe in the shape of a truck or a plane or a car or a bus, wrapped in aluminum foil. I really like chocolate, so I used to eat my chocolate on the way home from the store. But my brother Andrew, he likes to collect things. He always has. And sitting in the middle of the kitchen floor, it occurred to me that Andrew's chocolate collection had grown so vast that my mother had emptied the entire bottom shelf of the refrigerator to house Andrew's chocolate collection, to protect Andrew's chocolate collection from the warm Australian climate. And Andrew was in the sandbox. And my mother, she was upstairs, and she obviously wasn't coming downstairs until she'd finished doing whatever it was she was doing. So I walked over to the refrigerator, and I opened the refrigerator door. And there they were. As family legend would have it, there were 147 chocolates in Andrew's collection that morning. I didn't eat the chocolates straight away. First, I just took them all out of the refrigerator and I neatly arranged them in the middle of the kitchen floor. I had rows of trucks and buses and parking garages and airports. And then, one by one, I began to devour Andrew's chocolate collection. About a half an hour later, my mother came downstairs, and as family legend would have it, I was devouring the 47th chocolate when she walked into the kitchen. She looked at me, I looked at her, she screamed at the top of her voice, "What are you doing? What are you doing?" And I've got to believe that God would like to say that to us sometimes. I've got to believe that God would like to march straight into our lives and say, "What are you doing?" Like to march in and say, "I've given you life, I've filled it with so many gifts and so many blessings, put you in the midst of abundance. What are you doing?" And it is this search, it is this struggle in the midst of all these blessings that we find ourselves that we call life, that we call the quest of life, the journey of the soul. And in the midst of all of that, each and every single one of us is searching for one thing. All of us, without exception, we want to be happy. You want to be happy. I want to be happy. The human heart is on a quest for happiness. The human heart is on a quest for happiness. We have this great desire for happiness, and we live out of this desire. We live out of this desire. Now, I don't know if you've noticed, but from time to time, people do stupid things. Have you noticed? From time to time, people do stupid things, and we maybe scratch our heads. Maybe it's our parents, or maybe it's our children, maybe it's our friends at school, maybe it's our colleagues at work, maybe it's our boss, maybe it's our employees. From time to time, people do stupid things, and we watch people doing stupid things, and we ask ourselves, why would anybody ever do something so stupid? We ask ourselves, don't they know that's going to make them miserable? We ask ourselves, why would anybody do something so stupid? The answer? People do stupid things because they believe those stupid things will bring them happiness. People do stupid things because they believe those stupid things will bring them happy. People don't wake up in the morning and say to themselves, nice day. I wonder, how can I make myself miserable today? The human heart is on a quest for happiness. You want to be happy, I want to be happy, and we act out of that desire for happiness. We live out of that desire for happiness. Now, the human person is made up of 4 aspects: physical, emotional, intellectual, and spiritual. Now, physically, if you eat the right sorts of food, and you sleep regularly, and you exercise regularly, how do you feel? You feel great, yes or yes? You feel great. You feel more fully alive, you're healthier, you're happier, you're more focused, and you have a richer, more abundant experience of life, physically. Emotionally, you give focus to your relationships. Emotionally, you give focus to your relationships. Emotionally, you fall in love. How do you feel? You feel great. Yes or yes? Yes. Why? Why? Because you switch the focus off self onto another. And as you switch the focus off self onto another, you increase your ability to love. And as your ability to love increases, your ability to be loved increases. You feel more fully alive emotionally. You're healthier, you're happier, you have a richer, more abundant experience of life. Intellectually, you take 10 minutes a day to read a good book. Not 2 hours, 10 minutes a day to read a good book. What happens? You become more focused, more alert, more vibrant, more vital. Your vision of yourself expands. Your vision of the world expands. Intellectually, you're healthier, you're happier, you feel more fully alive. You have a richer, more abundant experience of life. Spiritually, you step into the classroom of silence. You take a few moments each day to get reconnected with yourself, to get reconnected with your God. What happens? A sense of peace. A sense of peace. You feel more focused, more alert, more centered, more peaceful in your life. Physically, emotionally, intellectually, spiritually, we know the things that bring us happiness. We just don't do them. Physically, emotionally, intellectually, spiritually, we know the things that bring us happiness. We just don't choose them. We just don't choose them. Because life, our whole lives are a series of choices. We're making them every day, hundreds of them. Some of them as big as, what we're going to wear to college, and some of them as small as, what we're going to do with the rest of our lives. But we're making decisions every day. That was a joke. Appreciate the courtesy chuckle. We're making decisions every day, and those decisions are forming our actions. Those actions are forming our habits. Those habits are forming our character. And that character is forming our destiny. Right in the middle there, the foundation of life, the foundation of character, habits.
Let me ask you this. What is one thing you could do that would radically alter your life right now? Not a pipe dream, not something you hope or wish for, but one thing that you have control over, that you could do right now, that would radically alter your future. Maybe it's eating better. Maybe it's exercising every day. Maybe it's giving up alcohol. Maybe it's spending more time with people you love. Maybe it's reading great books that expand your vision of yourself and your vision of the world. What's the one thing that you could do right now that would radically alter your course throughout your life? And why aren't you doing it? And by doing or changing that one thing, wouldn't you be happier? Wouldn't you be healthier? Wouldn't you have a richer, more abundant experience of life? 90% of our happiness and 90% of our misery comes from our own choices. Happiness isn't achieved by the reckless pursuit with all our time, talent, effort, and energy. Happiness is achieved by right living.
What are your habits? What are your habits? What are the things you do every day or every week or every month with unerring consistency? Because if you can tell me what your habits are, I can tell you what sort of a person you are. If you can tell me what your habits are, I can tell you what your future looks like. Why? Because habits create character. Good habits create good character. Bad habits create bad character. And your character is your destiny. The foundation of life, the foundation of success, the foundation of character, habits. But the foundation of habits, action, and primarily choices. Choices. How do you make your choices? Do you choose happiness? Do you choose happiness? Or are you choosing misery? When you look at your habits, are they things that are bringing you happiness? Or when you look at your habits, are they things that are bringing you misery? When you look at your habits, do you find choices for happiness or choices for misery? You see, I believe in heaven and hell. I believe in heaven and hell, and I believe they start in this life. And I believe in this life, we are the creators of our own heavens and our own hells. We choose 90% of our happiness, and we choose 90% of our misery. We create our heavens in this life, and we create our hell in this life. Are we choosing happiness, or are we choosing misery? Are we choosing happiness, or are we choosing misery? And how do we make our choices? Well, the world's dwindled it down to just 3 philosophies. Most people, every day, when they make most of their choices, work out of one of 3 operating philosophies. Number 1, individualism. Most people, when they have to make a decision in their lives, they simply ask themselves, what's in it for me? What's in it for me? What can I get out of it? And they make their choice based on what they discover in the answer to that question. Individualism. Second most dominant philosophy in our age is the philosophy of hedonism. Hedonism. We ask ourselves, well, if it feels good, I'll do it. If it feels good, I'll do it. If it doesn't feel good, I won't do it. And finally, the third most dominant philosophy of our age is the philosophy of minimalism. The minimalist asks himself or herself, what is the least I can do? What is the least I can do? What is the least I can do and still stay physically fit? What is the least I can do and still get through school? What is the least I can do and keep my parents from nagging me? What is the least I can do and keep my spouse from nagging me? And ultimately, what is the least I can do and still get to heaven? Minimalism. What is the least I can do? And so 2 roads diverge in the yellow wood of most people's lives, and they simply ask themselves, what's in it for me? If it feels good, I'll do it. And what is the least I can do? But let me ask you, what happens to a family or a community or a nation where every single person asks himself, what's in it for me? What happens to a family where every person says, what's in it for me, and only acts out of that philosophy of individualism? What happens to a family? It falls apart, it grows apart, it self-destructs. And what happens to a community where every single person in that community says, if it feels good, I'll do it, and if it doesn't feel good, I won't? What happens to a community, whether it's as small as a family or as large as a nation, where every single person says, if it feels good, I'll do it? That community will fall apart, it will grow apart, it will self-destruct. But what happens to a community, a family, a nation, where every single person says, well, yeah, what is the least I can do? What is the least I can do? Whether it's as small as a family or as large as a nation, that community will slowly but surely fall apart, grow apart, self-destruct. Because these philosophies that the world are proposing, and they're proposing them as a path of happiness. These philosophies that the world are proposing, and they are proposing them as a path toward happiness. These philosophies are fatally flawed. They are self-destructive, and they don't bring happiness, they bring misery. They don't bring happiness, they bring misery. And yet most people, every day, make most of their decisions based on these philosophies. What's in it for me? If it feels good, I'll do it. And what is the least I can do? How do you make your decisions? How do you make your decisions? Are you choosing happiness or are you choosing misery? Are you creating habits that create happiness, or are you creating habits with your choices that create misery? One of the greatest pieces of American literature is the poem by Robert Frost, which deals with this whole concept of making a choice, of making a choice. The road less traveled. Two roads diverge in a yellow wood. And sorry I could not travel both, and be one traveler, long I stood, and looked down one as far as I could to where it bent in the undergrowth. Then took the other as just as fair, and having perhaps the better claim, because it was grassy and wanted wear. Though as for that, the passing there had warned them both about the same. And both that morning equally lay in leaves no step had trodden black. Oh, I kept the first for another day, yet knowing how way leads to way, I doubted if I should ever come back. I shall be telling this with a sigh, some were ages and ages hence. Two roads diverge in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. We're all familiar with the poem. We're all familiar with the poem. As I read it, sometimes I think the danger is that we believe that the poem is about one moment in a person's life. The danger is that we fall into the trap of believing that the poem is about this one monumental moment in a person's life where we come to this two roads diverge in a yellow wood, and we have to make the choice to walk one or the other. So often, we see people of fame or success, of great character on television, in movies, we read books about them. And very often you hear people talking about these people as if at one moment in their lives they made this choice to walk a path, and that was it. Since that moment, just everything has been because of that moment. But Frost's poem is not about one moment in a person's life, as you and I well know, because two roads diverge in a yellow wood, and we choose one or the other, the path less traveled or the path more traveled. But no sooner than we've taken 3 or 4 steps down that path, what happens? Two roads diverge in a yellow wood again. We find ourselves having to make another choice. We find ourselves at another crossroad, as we do dozens of times in our day, as we do hundreds of times in our weeks and our months and in our lives. We're constantly having to make choices. We're constantly having to make decisions, whether to take the path more traveled, whether to take the path less traveled. Constantly in our lives, we're having to choose. And how are we making those choices? How are you making your choices? Based on the empty philosophies of hedonism, individualism, minimalism, their false promise to bring us happiness? Because let's face it, most people out there are. And yet, are there that many happy people? I mean people who are genuinely happy, independent of substance or circumstance. Think about it in your own life. Are there that many people who are genuinely happy, independent of substance or circumstance? And think about the people in your life who you know. Think about the times in your own life where you've chosen these philosophies, individualism, hedonism, minimalism, as recipes for happiness, as recipes for success. And have they brought you happiness? Have they brought you happiness? Or have they brought you a misery of types? Or have they brought you a misery of types? Two roads diverge in the yellow wood of our lives every day, every single day. And how do we make our choices? And is there another way than this prescription the world is giving us? Individualism, hedonism, minimalism. I'd like to propose to you tonight that there is another way. That we need to step back from the hustle and bustle of life. That there is something more for us than the day-to-day drudgery of life, than the quiet desperation that Thoreau describes. That there is meaning to life, and that without discovering some meaning in life, and without clearly identifying the purpose of our lives, then we are automatically drawn into the empty philosophies of our world and of our culture. Point A, if we call this pillar here, if we describe this pillar here as point A, this is where we all are right now. With our strengths and our weaknesses, we're at point A. with our faults, our failings, our flaws, our defects, our talents, our abilities, our potential. Point A. This is who we are right now. This is where we are right now. And if we describe this other column over here as point B, at point B, we reach perfection. Not in a robotic sense, not in the sense that we all become the same, but perfection in the sense that at point B, you become perfectly who God created you to be. At point B, you become perfectly who God created you to be. The distance between point A and point B, we call the journey of the soul. The distance between point A and point B, we call the path of salvation. The path of salvation. Many people believe that we have to make this journey, or that we are called to make this journey, but most people mistakenly believe that the journey is about this. We're at point A, we want to go to point B. If we go to church on Sunday, we take a step. If we read our Bible, we take another step. If we do a good deed, we take another step. If we say our prayers before we go to bed at night, we take another step. Do another good deed, take another step. Come to Mass the next week, take another step. Commit a big sin, 2 steps back. Commit a little sin, 1 step back. And so on and so forth. You see, the modern world, the modern media, has done a phenomenal job of convincing people that the essence of Christianity is rules, regulations, sin, punishment, duties, obligations. And it isn't. It isn't. All these things play a role. All these things play a role. But the essence of Christianity? No. You see, if I ask you, what does it mean to be Christian? What does it mean to be Christian? Most of you will tell me to be Christian means to be striving to become all you can be. To be striving to become more like Jesus Christ. You ask people, most people on the streets of America, what does it mean to be Christian? Most people would say to be Christian means to be striving to become more like Jesus Christ. But the reality is you cannot become more like Jesus Christ and at the same time stay as you are. You cannot become more like Jesus Christ and at the same time stay as you are. And so the essence of Christianity and the essence of life is change. It's about changing. It's about growing. It's about developing. It's about becoming the best version of ourselves. It's about becoming the best version of ourselves. If you've been wondering, what God wants from you or for you, if you've been wondering what God's dream for you is, I can tell you. God wants you to become the best version of yourself. He wants you to become the best version of yourself. He doesn't want you to become some second-rate version of your friends, and He doesn't want you to become some second-rate version of yourself. He doesn't want you to become some second-rate version of your parents. God wants you to be all you can be. God wants you to become the best version of yourself. You see, the world doesn't need another Mother Teresa. The world doesn't need another Francis of Assisi. The world needs you. You see, Mother Teresa came, lived a wonderful life, and played her role, made her journey toward the best version of herself. Francis did the same thing, lived a wonderful life, made his journey towards the best version of himself. The world doesn't need another Mother Teresa. The world doesn't need another Francis of Assisi. The world needs you to play your role. What does God want from you? He doesn't want to control you. He doesn't want to stifle you. He doesn't want to make you miserable. He doesn't want to force you to do things you don't want to do. God wants you to become the best version of yourself. He wants you to make this journey.
It all comes down to choices. In every choice, we choose happiness or misery. In every choice, we choose the best version of ourselves or some second-rate, lesser version of ourselves. How do you make your choices? Consciously or subconsciously, when you've got a decision to make, are you asking yourself, what's in it for me? Are you asking yourself, if it feels good, I'll do it. If it doesn't feel good, I won't do it. Are you asking yourself, what is the least I can do? The ultimate navigational instrument is our essential purpose. What is our essential purpose? To become the best version of ourselves. And once we place our essential purpose at the center of our lives, everything else makes sense. Every decision becomes easier. 2 roads diverge in the yellow wood of our lives. We simply have to ask ourselves, which of these 2 paths will help me become the best version of myself?
How do we do it? How do we do it? 4 major areas of the human person: physically, emotionally, intellectually, spiritually. Physically, we eat the right sorts of food, we exercise regularly, we sleep regularly, we feel great, we feel more fully alive. Why? Because we're making this journey. Physically, we're making this journey when we eat the right sorts of food, when we sleep regularly, when we exercise regularly. We're making this journey. We feel more fully alive. Why? Because we're becoming the better version of ourselves. We're becoming the best version of ourselves physically. Emotionally, we fall in love. Emotionally, we give priority and focus to our relationships. We feel more fully alive, we're healthier, we're happier, we have a richer, more abundant experience of life. Why? Because we're making this journey. We're moving from the person we are with our faults and our failings and our weaknesses towards the better version of ourselves, towards the best version of ourselves emotionally. Intellectually, we take that 10 minutes a day to read good books, to learn new things. What happens? Our mind begins to expand. Our vision of ourselves changes. Our vision of our world changes. We're healthier. We're happier. We have a richer, more abundant experience of life. Why? Because that experience taps into the journey. We're making the journey through that action. We're becoming the best version of ourselves through that action. And finally, spiritually. Spiritually, we step into the classroom of silence. We become reconnected with ourselves and with our God. And through that connection with self and through that connection with God, we find a sense of peace. We find ourselves focused, centered, healthier, happier. Why? Because we're making the journey. We're reaching out and grasping at the best version of ourselves. We're reaching out and striving to become the better person we know we can be. The better person we know we can be. Example, those of you who are not already asleep, if you could just close your eyes for a moment. You'll wake those that are sleeping. Close your eyes for a moment. Ask yourself, in what one way can you become a better person tomorrow? In what one way can you become a better person tomorrow? All right, now open your eyes. Does everyone have one way? Yes or yes? How long did it take? 7 seconds? Is the power of silence? Is the power of reflection? It's the power of meditation. It's the power of prayer to come to this place, to go into the classroom of silence and ask ourselves, in what one way can I become a better person tomorrow? And automatically be called to make the journey. Automatically be called to make the journey. To become the better version of ourselves, to become the best version of ourselves, to become all we can be. That's what God wants from us. That's what God wants for us. That's what God's dream for you is. Why? Because that's where we find happiness.
The most important discovery you'll make in your entire life is your essential purpose. And what is your essential purpose? To become the best version of yourself. Because once you understand what the goal of life is, everything else makes sense. Whether it's friendship or marriage or work or books or music, culture, your experience of life, everything should be understood in relation to our essential purpose. Take books, for example. I mean, what makes a great book? Is it just because it has good plot? Is it just because it has good character development? No. A good book is a book that helps us achieve our essential purpose. A good book is a book that encourages us, inspires us, challenges us to want to become our best self. You know, what makes a good marriage? You know, what is the goal of marriage? Is it just two people getting together, living together, paying the bills together, fighting together? No. The meaning of marriage, the goal of marriage, is two people coming together, encouraging each other, inspiring each other, challenging each other to become the best version of themselves, and then raising children and educating them to become the best version of themselves. Why do we go to work? What's the meaning of work? What's the goal of work? Do we just go to work to make money? Do we just go to work to make money, to pay the bills, to buy a car, to buy a house, to buy clothes? No. Making money is the secondary value of work. The primary value of work is that when we work well, when we work hard, when we pay attention to the details of our work, we become a better person. We become our best self. We develop character. We move towards our essential purpose to become the best version of ourselves. What makes good music? What makes good movies? Good music, good movies are those that inspire us to want to be our best self. But to give you an idea of how far our culture has shifted away from our essential purpose, let me ask you a question. When was the last time you got up from in front of the television set and said, you know what, I'm a better person for having watched that show? It doesn't happen that often now, does it? Now, that's not to say that there's no good programming, but it gives you an idea of how far our culture has shifted away from our essential purpose. It also gives you a clue as to why so many people lead lives of quiet desperation. Live your life with your essential purpose in mind. Place your essential purpose at the center of your life. Make all your decisions with your essential purpose in mind, and you will live a life uncommon.
Your desire for happiness, my desire for happiness, can only be quenched by making this journey. By making this journey from point A to point B, from the person we are to the better person we know we can be, to the best version of ourselves. This journey is life. The essence of Christianity is change. Why? Because Christianity is a dynamic way of life. It's not a lifeless set of rules and regulations. It's a dynamic lifestyle. Created to do what? Created to help us make the journey to become the best version of ourselves, to live out our mission. To live out our mission. To find purpose, meaning in life. To live life passionately, enthusiastically, energetically. To catch sight of the vision of all we can be and to strive to become the best version of ourselves. That's God's vision for humanity. That's God's vision for humanity. But most people, wandering around over here at point A, wandering around over here in circles, asking themselves, what's in it for me? If it feels good, I'll do it. What is the least I can do? What can I get out of it? When can I get it? How much can I get? Leading lives of quiet desperation, caught up in the day-to-day drudgery of life, convinced that the essence of life is centering on pleasure, lost. Where is the meaning in life? It's caught up in the call to become all we can be. It's caught up in the call to become the best version of ourselves. And corresponding with the call is our desire for happiness. Corresponding with the call is our desire for happiness. You want to be happy? I want to be happy. Why? Why do we all have this desire for happiness? Why is it so strong in every single person? Because God, when He created us, it's like His eternal homing device. You know, He creates us and He puts this desire for happiness within us, and then He sends us off into the universe. He sends us off into the universe, and He knows that that desire for happiness is so strong that sooner or later it will bring us back to Him. He knows that that desire for happiness is so strong that sooner or later it will draw us along this path. Sooner or later, it will challenge us to accept this journey, and to reach out to grasp it, to strive to become all we can be, the best version of ourselves. But the very foundation, choices. Choices. How do you make your choices? When you have to make a decision in your life, do you ask yourself, what's in it for me? Do you ask yourself, if it feels good, I'll do it? Do you ask yourself, what is the least I can do? Or tonight, I propose a new model, a different model. I propose that when two roads diverge in the yellow woods of our lives, we ask ourselves, will this choice help me become the best version of myself? Will this choice help me become the best version of myself? Because it's not that hard. You know, you come home from school after a hard day, you can sit, in your big lazy boy recliner chair in front of your 127-inch idiot box with, a six-pack of Coke or a six-pack of beer, and your 300-ounce bag of Doritos. Or you can go out for a jog. You can go running, you can go to the gym, you can work out. You ask yourself, in this case, these two choices, which would be choosing happiness and which would be choosing misery? In these two choices, which will be choosing happiness and which will be choosing misery? In these two choices, which will be choosing the best version of myself and which will be choosing a lesser version of myself? Which of these choices will help me become the best version of myself, and which of these two choices is going to contribute to me becoming a second-rate version of myself? See, life is a quest for happiness. The human heart is on a quest for happiness. You want to be happy, I want to be happy. God has given us this desire for happiness, and I believe He wants us to be happy. I believe He wants us to be happy. And He's given us this wonderful thing we call free will. He allows us to choose our happiness, and He allows us to choose our misery. He allows us to choose our happiness, and He allows us to choose our misery. Here in this life, He allows us to create a heaven, and He allows us to create a hell. Not perfectly, but in some way, some shape, some form, we're the authors, we're the masters, we're the creators of our own heavens and our own hells here in this lifetime. We choose our happiness and we choose our misery. It's time we stepped up to the plate and accepted responsibility for the happiness we're choosing every single day and the misery we're choosing every single day. What are your habits? What are the things you do every day, every week, every month? Because if you can tell me what your habits are, I can tell you what sort of a person you are. Go home tonight. Go home tonight. Get out your journal. Get out a scrapbook. Get out some blank paper. Make a list of your habits. Make a list of your habits, the things you do every day, the things you do every week, the things you do every month. And then go through your habits and ask yourself, which of those habits are helping you become the best version of yourself? Which of those habits are helping you become the best version of yourself? Which of those habits are helping you make this journey? And then ask yourself, which of those habits are self-destructive? Which of those habits are destroying you from within? Which of those habits are contributing to you becoming a second-rate version of yourself, a lesser version of yourself? Go through the list and mark them off. And then ask yourself, how can you change those habits? How can you change those habits? As we spend these several days together, we're going to talk about the habits in our lives, which of the habits help us become the best version of ourselves, and which of those habits create misery in our lives and are self-destructive. We're going to talk about what helps us make the journey. What helps us make the journey? What helps us become the best version of ourselves? We're going to talk about what are the obstacles in the journey? What are the things that stop us from making the journey? What are the things that prevent us from becoming the best version of ourselves? But a great place for us to start is to stop, is to reflect, is to sit down, make a list of our habits. Go through the list, ask ourselves, which of these habits are self-destructive and which of these habits are helping us become the best version of ourselves? Because when you look through the history books and you take out the heroes, the leaders, the legends, the champions, the saints, you ask themselves, what is the difference between us and them? What is the difference between the heroes, the leaders, the legends, the champions, the saints that fill the history books and the rest of the masses that march through history? Some people would tell you it's freak luck. Some people tell you it's chance. And some people tell you they're God's favorites. And all of those people would be wrong. All of those people would be wrong. The difference between the heroes, the leaders, the legends, the champions, the saints that fill the history books and the rest of us, they just have better habits. They just have better habits. When you dissect their lives, when you take their lives apart, when you look at the things they do every day, every week, every month, you just discover they have better habits. They have better habits. They have a sense of who they are, where they're going. They have better habits. You take a look at successful people, whether it's Michael Jordan or Mother Teresa or Bill Gates, you discover somewhere early in their lives they established a point A. They worked out where they were. They worked out who they were. They wrote it down. They said, this is who I am. This is where I am. These are my strengths. These are my weaknesses. The very next thing is they worked out where they wanted to go. They defined their point B in their lives. They asked themselves, who do I want to be? What do I want to achieve? What do I want to achieve in this one life, this one short life I have? They defined their point B, not in fuzzy, hazy terms. Michael Jordan didn't wake up one morning and say, yeah, I want to be a good basketball player. Michael Jordan woke up and said, I want to be the greatest basketball player that ever lived. Bill Gates didn't wake up one morning and said, yeah, I'd really like to have a bit of money in my life, you know? Bill Gates woke up one morning and said, I want to be the richest man on the planet. Hazy goals produce no results. Successful people, the heroes, the leaders, the legends, the champions, the saints, they know who they are. They know their strengths, they know their weaknesses, and they know who they wish to become and what they wish to achieve. They define their point A, they define their point B, not in fuzzy, hazy terms. Clearly, they write it down. They don't just think about it, they write it down. They stick it on their bathroom mirror. They remind themselves of it. Every morning when they wake up, the first thing they do is they remind themselves of their point B. Every night before they go to bed, the last thing they do is they remind themselves of their point B. They remind themselves of their goal, of their purpose, of their mission. And they remind themselves of their goal, their purpose, their mission in every waking moment of every hour of every single day. And sometimes in the journey, they come up against obstacles. But they find ways over them or under them or around them or through them. And they persevere. And they persevere. And they keep their goal in sight. They keep their goal in sight, and they grasp that goal. They achieve that goal. Why? Clear sense of direction, clear sense of purpose, mission, goal. They know who they are, strengths and weaknesses. They know who they wish to become, what they wish for their goal to be, what they wish to achieve. And I know, maybe making a lot of money or becoming the greatest basketball player in history, maybe these are not the most noble goals. Question is, do you even have a point B? You and I, do we even have a point B in our lives, or are we over here at point A, wandering round in circles, living in the miscredited fantasy that one day we'll wake up and all of a sudden everything will just magically be different, and we'll have everything we ever wanted, we'll have achieved everything we ever wanted, and we'll have become the person we wanted to become and knew we could become? How do you make your choices? How do you make your choices? Because what separates the heroes, the leaders, the legends, the champions, the saints from the rest of masses marching through history? They just have better habits. Where do those habits come from? From choices. The fundamental shift that has to take place in our culture is a shift away from the philosophies of individualism, hedonism, minimalism. So that when we get in decision-making situations, we don't ask ourselves, what's in it for me? What is the least I can do? And if it feels good, I'll do it. But rather, when we get into those decision-making situations, we begin to choose happiness by asking ourselves, will this path help me become the best version of myself? Because physically, emotionally, intellectually, spiritually, the only times you're happy is when you're making this journey. Physically, emotionally, intellectually, spiritually, the things that bring us happiness are the things that lead us along this path. It is a way of happiness that God calls us along. He doesn't want us to be miserable, contrary to popular opinion. He doesn't want us to be miserable. His plan for us, His dream for us, His vision for us is one of happiness, one of great happiness. But He wants us to start choosing happiness in the physical, emotional, intellectual, and spiritual choices we make every single day. He wants us to start choosing happiness. At different times in our lives, we all need to step back. We have a great opportunity to do that this week. In the late 1960s, there was a young man who was in high school, and his dream was to become a famous musician. So he dropped out of high school and he began traveling across America, playing his music wherever people would listen. But as a high school dropout and with very little musical experience, he found it very difficult to get work as a musician. He found himself living the discouraging habit of playing to a handful of drunks here and there in some tiny club each night. His only joy in life was his girlfriend. He had this dream to become a famous musician, so he stuck at his playing to a handful of people here and there each night, believing that somewhere along the line he would get a break. But physically, he was worn down. Professionally, he was failing. Financially, he was bankrupted. He was so poor, he used to sleep in laundromats at night to save the cost of a hotel room. His girlfriend, her dream was to marry a famous musician. And she got sick and tired of his gypsy lifestyle, and so she broke up with him. The young musician became so discouraged that he decided to commit suicide. This wasn't his dream. His dream was to play to sell-out crowds. His dream was to have his music in every music store around the country. His dream was to walk down the streets and people ask him for autographs. His dream was to see his name in lights. He even had a dream as a child that he would play to a sell-out crowd in a baseball stadium, which in the 60s was an absurd thought. So he went home that night, and in a half-hearted attempt to take his own life, he drank a bottle of poisoned furniture polish and got very, very, very drunk. He woke up 36 hours later, and that afternoon he checked himself into a mental institution. And there in the mental institution, they didn't give him any medication. There in the mental institution, he spent time with the patients. And 2 weeks later, he checked himself out of that mental institution, a new man, completely resolved to pursue his dream to become a famous musician. It wasn't anything the doctors or nurses had said to him that had cured him. It wasn't any medication that they had given him that had cured him. The other patients had cured him. By being with the other patients, he'd recognized his great giftedness. And 2 weeks later, he checked himself out of that mental institution, completely resolved to pursue his dream to become a famous musician, to do whatever it took, to work as hard as was necessary. 3 years later, he wrote a song called Piano Man. It's the story of Billy Joel. And today, there's hardly a person on the planet who doesn't know who Billy Joel is.
Don't say, I'm too young. Don't say, I'm too old. Most people spend the first half of their life saying, I'm too young, and the second half of their life saying, I'm too old, and somewhere in the middle, they get kidnapped by what Thoreau described as a life of quiet desperation. Don't say I'm too young. Don't say I'm too old. Mozart was 11 years old when he wrote his first symphony. Ralph Waldo Emerson was 14 years old when he enrolled at Harvard. Bill Gates was 19 years old when he co-founded Microsoft. Ralph Lauren was 29 when he created Polo. Pablo Picasso, 55 when he painted Guernica. Dom Perignon was 60 when he first produced champagne. Nelson Mandela was 71 years old when he was released from a South African prison. 4 years later, at the age of 75, he was elected president of South Africa. Michelangelo was 72 years old when he designed the dome of St. Peter's Basilica in Rome. And Frank Lloyd Wright was 89 years old when he completed his work on the Guggenheim Museum. Don't say I'm too old. Don't say I'm too young. Now is your time. This is your time.
At different times in our lives, we all need a new perspective. At different times in our lives, we all need to step back and get another look at ourselves. Get another look at all we're capable of being, of doing, and of becoming. To get a look of that vision of the best version of ourselves. At different times in our lives, we all need to step back and get another look at the world we live in. The way we live our lives is determined by the way we see the world. How do you see the world? How do you see the world? You see, the great danger is us to fall into the trap of believing that the whole world is like the city we live in. Sometimes it's a temptation to fall into the trap of believing that the whole world is like the street we live on. But it isn't. It isn't. You see, if we reduce the world's population to 100 people, if we reduce the world's population proportionally to 100 people, 57 of those 100 people would come from Asia, 21 from Europe, 14 from North and South America, and 8 from Africa. 51 would be women, 49 would be men. 70 of those 100 people would be non-Christian, 30 would be Christian. 68 of those 100 people would not be able to read and write. Think about it. How do you see the world? 68% of the world's population cannot read and write. 6 of those 100 people would own and control more than half of the world's wealth. All of those 6 people would be US citizens. 3 of those 6 people would live on the North Shore of Long Island, on the same street. 1 of those 100 people would have just been born. 1 of those 100 people would be just about to die. And only 1 of those 100 people would have been to college. How do you see the world? Maybe in your world, everyone goes to college. But on planet Earth, 1 in 100 people. How do you see the world? Because the way we see the world determines the way we live our lives. 1/3 of the world's population is dying from lack of bread. 2 billion people hungry today just for bread. 1/3 of the world's population is dying from lack of justice. And 1/3 of the world's population is dying from overeating. How do you see the world? How do you see the world? Because the way we see the world determines the way we live our lives. The way we see the world determines the way we live our lives. The way I see it, the way I think nature encourages us to see it, the way I think God encourages us to see it, life comes down to 2 very simple realities. People were made to be loved, and things were made to be used. But we love things, and we use people. And every time we encounter God, He simply encourages us to reverse those 2 simple realities. To start loving people again and using things. To put things in our own lives back in their proper order, in their proper perspective. To put things back in the world, back in their proper order, proper perspective. Where does it start? It starts with choices. Are we choosing happiness? Are we choosing misery? Are we choosing happiness or are we choosing misery? We're making choices every single day, hundreds of them. Some of them small, some of them large. Are we choosing happiness or are we choosing misery? Because happiness comes from making this journey. It's a choice. It's a choice. Our choices create actions. Our actions create habits. Our habits create character. And your character is your destiny. What are your habits? Are you choosing happiness or are you choosing misery?